your PCM or your propulsion control module or your ECU engine control unit or ECM engine control module, whatever people are calling it, depending on the brand and all that kind of good stuff. Yes, that is what changes your horsepower of the engine, because you are changing the mapping of it. A gasoline engine basically runs on timing and fuel and fire. So you supply a certain amount of fuel with a certain amount of air at the right amount of time, and it will create an explosion, which moves your piston up and down, and you can make that timing go before, after, you can advance it, you can retard it, you can change that timing, and you can increase the amount of air, and you can increase the amount of fuel that you deliver to that cylinder, which is going to give you more horsepower and more RPM, all that kind of good stuff. It's very broad, basic overview of how an engine works. So if you change the fuel delivery and the timing, let's say you only open the injector for 1 millisecond versus 2 millisecond, you are doubling the amount of fuel that you give to the engine. With that increase in fuel, the increase in air, all that good stuff, you are creating more horsepower. It's a pretty basic theory, I guess you would say, or way that an engine works. So that's how every brand changes the horsepower of their engines. You get a platform being your block, and the delivery of the fuel in your electronic system and how it all operates, but a bigger engine, more horsepower, more capabilities, more displacement, which is the amount of space that is inside of your cylinder. That's the displacement of the engine. And the more displacement, you're gonna make more power, all that kind of good stuff. There's a lot more to it than that, but changing the amount of fuel, the amount of air based on how long you open your injectors and at what time you initiate your spark plug to fire, that changes your horsepower. And yeah, it does. Now, when it comes to the fuel economy, though, that doesn't necessarily correlate. If you put lower horsepower on a boat, you would think in theory, yes. So like if you think about a car and you've got the same car, you've got whatever car you want, doesn't matter, model, you put a 4-cylinder in there, you put a 6-cylinder in there, you put a V8 in there. All of those are going to change your fuel economy drastically. The one thing that is different in a boat versus the car is the car, that model didn't really change. The inside didn't change, the body didn't change, the doors didn't change, the seating didn't change, the weight didn't really change all that much. The weight difference in the engine would, but the overall car doesn't really change. Whereas your boat, that's much different. So if you have a boat, because a boat is being pushed through water, water is very different when it comes to how you push a boat through it, because you've got drag, you've got wind, you've got current, you've got all these factors that are against the boat moving through the water. And if you take your engine and you lower the horsepower, you would think, oh, I've got a V6 versus an inline 4. The inline 4 is going to consume less fuel. It doesn't really work like that with a boat. Most of the time when you lessen the horsepower, you actually increase the amount of fuel that you consume because of the speed and the performance of the boat. So if you take a boat that weighs whatever, 5,000 pounds, doesn't matter. You know, the numbers are irrelevant. You take a boat that weighs a certain amount and it has certain performance aspects with the propeller and all that kind of stuff. And let's say that boat has a cruising speed of 30 miles an hour and it consumes 12 gallons per hour of fuel and it has a top speed of 45 miles an hour. I'm making these numbers up. And you change that engine to a lower horsepower. Let's say you go from a 250 to a 200. You would think you would consume less fuel, but in fact, you're probably going to consume more fuel, because in order for you to get that 30 mile an hour cruising speed, you're going to need to be burning 17 gallons per hour of fuel to get that same performance. You'll have to change the propeller, which is also going to change the fuel consumption, because you are loading the engine down more than you are with the higher horsepower. The higher horsepower is able to move that 5,000 pound boat a lot easier than the less horsepower boat. So the smaller engine needs more fuel to move this massive boat, this weight, this 5,000 pounds, whatever the boat is. It's going to need more power, more fuel to push that boat because it's a smaller engine. Whereas the larger engine, the weight is a lot less affecting it because it's got more horsepower. So it can consume less fuel to make a certain performance aspect of the boat. And then, not to mention, when you add weight to the boat, you put people on there, you put gear, you put all this stuff on the boat, then you're going to weigh the boat down. It's going to be slower, and it's going to require more horsepower, and it's going to require more fuel for you to get that boat to perform. And then throw on top of that a let's call it a planing speed. So a planing speed is the amount or the speed that the boat needs to be going for it to plane out on top of the water. So let's say that with 250 horsepower, the planing speed of the boat is 3,000 RPM and 15 miles an hour, whatever. I'm making these numbers up. Well, with the other engine, in order for you to get that 15 miles an hour with the less horsepower, you're going to need to push it 3,500 RPM, which is going to consume more fuel to keep the boat on plane at 15, 20 mile an hour, whatever it is. So you're going to be consuming more fuel. It's going to consume more fuel to get the boat on plane. It's going to consume more fuel to keep it at cruising speed. And it's going to consume more fuel at top speed because you're going to be going a lot slower. So you're going to be running the engine at wide open a lot more. Depending on how you run the engine and how you weight the boat and all that kind of stuff, there are instances that, yes, you're going to consume less fuel, but that's why I wanted to have that whole discussion, because you need to understand that aspect of it to understand that it's a 50-50 shot. Some boats, less horsepower, same performance numbers. The way you run the boat, you're going to consume less fuel. A different boat with a different user and more weight and different performance, the way they use the boat, they're going to consume a lot more fuel because it's underpowered. So underpowered versus overpowered is really the discussion when it comes to that. Lower horsepower consuming less fuel, depending on the boat, depending on how you use the boat, and depending on where you run the boat, is going to depend on whether less horsepower is going to give you better fuel economy or if it's going to increase the fuel consumption that you have with that boat because of all those different factors. So it's not just a matter of less horsepower gives you better fuel economy. There's a lot more to it. And now you kind of get a gist of why that would be. John Lux says the overall conclusion is that twins are better for larger boats. Same discussion there, because larger boats depends. I mean, twins versus a single, there's tons of bay boats out there that run a single 350 and it has way better performance numbers than it does with, say, twin 140s. You got more horsepower, you got a single engine, you got one lower unit, one propeller versus two engines, more weight, two propellers, two lower units, more drag. So sometimes the performance aspects of a single versus a twins will actually not be better. The bigger the boat, yeah, the more horsepower you need, the more engines you need. There's lots of 32s and 34s out there that really would need triple engines, not just twin engines. So it all depends on the weight of the boat, the amount of gear that's being put on there, and how the boat is being run for, whether or not one engine or two engine or less horsepower or more horsepower is going to be better in that scenario with the type of boat and who's running it. So if you like this clip and you want to watch another one, you can see another one over here or watch the full episode over here.